I could forgive him, but I didn't want to. And that's where it all begins. How long can you build something, what you think is forever, carefully, deliberately, only to watch it crumble in an instant because of one text message? It was December 23rd, a date that used to mean something. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a shared day, ours. I had the same garlands we'd picked out, twinkling on the living room ceiling, still a little crooked on the right side because he'd hung them too quickly, the way he always rushed beauty, as if it weren't necessary. I'd been working all day, the kind of work no one notices unless you've forgotten something. That invisible labor. I picked up pastries from that French restaurant he liked. I lit a cinnamon candle, even though it gave me a headache. I set the table. I folded the napkins. I knew he wouldn't come. But that didn't stop me from making space for him. Inside, I wanted it so badly. I told myself it was to put an end to it. But people do that when they're too afraid to call something what it is: a hope, a humiliation, a habit. It had been a year since we broke up. 8 months since he blocked me. Since he unblocked me, accidentally, and then started posting again. His captions had become sharper. The kind of cryptic quips people love to decipher. Some people only show up when it's their turn. It hurt me to read that, after giving him everything I had, but I kept reading. You can't build with someone who only knows how to tear down. And I helped him with everything. He came first. I've endured people who would have left me. I loved him. Loved with all my heart. A few of my old friends liked it every time. Heart emoji. Applause. One of them commented, "I'm so proud of you for speaking your truth." His truth. Not true. My phone buzzed again, and I made the mistake of looking. It was a news story. A grainy photo of food, a table that looked eerily like mine, but warmer, surrounded by laughter. The caption, "Real family is the ones who are always with you." He tagged 2 of my cousins. And my best friend from college. The shame was so quiet it was a fog. Not a flood. Not a scream. Just this heavy haze behind my eyes, where tears wanted to rise but didn't. I turned the phone face down. I picked up the napkin I'd folded into a swan. It sank in my hand, losing its shape. And yet I smoothed it out as if that would fix anything. It was the part no one ever saw, the aftertaste of betrayal. Not the rage. Not the drama. Just the simple, painful silence that followed. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the cake I'd made. Chocolate orange, his favorite. I'd baked it anyway. I'd even used the right brand of zest he liked, the one I'd had to go to 3 stores to find. I leaned against the counter and tried to remember what it felt like to be loved without deserving it. I couldn't. You know, some people have photo albums filled with love. I have ledgers. Bills. Proof that I'd done enough, given enough, bent over backwards enough. And yet I was still being told I was too much. Or not enough. Whatever suited the mood that day. They always said I was so strong. It was a compliment made of brick. I became their shelter from the storms. Their keeper. And when I broke, they called it weakness. When I spoke, they called it cruel. But he was fragile. That's what they said. He's been through a lot. He's fragile. So I became strong again. Over and over until strength was the name they used to keep me quiet. I went to the window and looked out. The snow hadn't started falling yet, but the clouds were heavy, the kind that pressed low, like a hand on my back. Across the street, someone's living room was lit a soft amber. A family, maybe. Or a couple. Or a lonely person like me, pretending not to expect something. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself. Undramatic. No streaks of mascara. No slouched posture. Just a woman in a sweater she bought for someone who didn't want to see it. Arms crossed in front of a table set for a ghost. And in that moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt ridiculous. Not because I still loved him. I don't. At least, not the version of him he's decided to become. No, it wasn't love that kept me here. It was the story I refused to stop telling myself, that if I could just explain it, people would understand. That if I could show them the receipts, the charts, The texts, someone would finally say, "You were right." But all I heard were echoes. He had been in a dark place. I was controlling. I isolated him. They said never mind that I was the one who drove him to therapy, who answered the calls at 3 a.m. when he said he didn't know how to go on. I was the one who hid the worst of it, who stood between him and consequences like a human shield. And when he started rewriting the script, they applauded. Because he cried, and I didn't. Because he was charming, and I was exhausted. Because when women get tired, we stop smiling. And when we stop smiling, we lose the benefit of the doubt. I walked back into the living room and turned off the music. It had been playing quietly in the background, some winter jazz playlist. The kind you hear in hotel lobbies that want to sound elegant, but not emotional. It was too curated, too calm. It made the silence louder. I sat down on the couch. The blanket still smelled faintly of the fabric softener he liked, the kind that made me itch, but I used anyway. Small compromises. Tiny things. Invisible until they stack up and form the shape of a woman who doesn't know what she wants anymore, only what others expect. A knock on the door startled me, but it wasn't him. Of course it wasn't. It was a delivery, one of those subscription boxes I forgot to cancel. I took it inside, placed it by the table, and looked at the clock. 7:46. This time last year, he had been sobbing in my lap. And now? Now, he was sitting at a different table, surrounded by people who once called me family. Laughing, healing, reborn. That's the story, right? That women like me are stepping stones. That we exist to absorb damage, and when our job is done, the hero walks away whole. And we are left behind, branded as bitter, jealous, unstable. But I wasn't bitter. I was clear. And clarity, I've learned, is the first stage of freedom. I didn't throw the cake away. That would have made it about him. Instead, I cut myself a slice, placed it gently on the plate I'd set for him, and ate it slowly, deliberately, like a ritual. It was good. Not perfect. The texture could have been better. But it was mine. Tomorrow, I would begin something. I didn't know what yet. But something quiet. Not revenge. Not rage. Just truth. Because sometimes, the only way to reclaim your story is to tell it exactly as it happened, without apologies, without edits, without trying to make everyone comfortable. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them sit in the mess they helped make. I finished the cake. I washed the plate. I folded the swan napkin back into a square and placed it in the drawer. Then I blew out the candle. Not because I was sad, but because I was done. There was no storm, no slammed doors, no final scream. Only the slow hush of something dying that had already been dead for months. Maybe longer. That's how grief is, sometimes not loud, but gradual. It settles into the corners like dust. You don't see it until the sunlight hits just right, and then there it is layered over everything, dulling the edges. I woke up the next morning before the sun did, out of habit. The house was still. Too still. In the silence, the truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I had been waiting for something else entirely. I padded into the kitchen barefoot. The floor was cold. My phone was on the counter where I'd left it, still flipped screen down like a warning. I didn't want to look. Not because I was afraid of what he might say, but because I was afraid of what he wouldn't. The absence of words sometimes stings more than cruelty. Silence has its own kind of violence, especially when it comes from someone who once knew the sound of your heartbeat from across the room. I made tea chamomile, the one I used to brew for him when his hands shook. Back when he still called me anchor. Before that word turned into burden. I didn't like chamomile, not really. But I drank it anyway. Ritual over preference. That was our language. It's strange how you can look back and see the fault lines in what you thought was solid. Like how he only reached for my hand in public when he was nervous. How he introduced me as the one who keeps me sane like it was a compliment instead of a warning. How I slowly stopped using the word no and started saying okay even when I wasn't. He used to say I was the only one who saw him. But I think he meant I was the only one who refused to look away. I witnessed every spiral, every panic, every withdrawal. And when it all collapsed, he didn't thank me for holding the walls up. He blamed me for the cracks. That's the thing about being the support beam. When the house falls, no one wonders how long you stood there, holding it together. He told them I was controlling, that I made decisions for him, that I was cold. What he didn't tell them was how often I stayed up to track his breathing, how I answered every call, no matter the hour, how I lied to his job, his parents, even my friends, to protect him. Not out of pride, out of love. I didn't speak because I thought silence was strength. I didn't know that silence could be twisted too. The first person to believe him was my sister. She called me, voice hushed like she was hiding from herself. She said, "He told me you didn't want him to see us anymore. That you made him choose between you and family." I remember standing in the grocery store with my shopping basket in hand, staring at a head of lettuce I didn't end up buying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said, "That's not true." She paused, then said, "Well, that's what he said." And he was really upset. And that was that. One sentence. One assumption. And years of trust began to thin like old paper. Later, my college roommate unfollowed me. No message. Just gone. I found out months later that he'd told her I'd cut him off from everyone and tried to control his life. She believed him. Because he cried. Because I didn't. Funny how tears work like magic for some people and like poison for others. I didn't realize how many people needed me to be wrong. Not because I had hurt them, but because they couldn't handle the version of events where I had given everything and still lost. People are more comfortable when the world makes sense. And women like me who stay, who carry, who don't scream until it's over, don't fit neatly into their idea of what a good woman looks like. We're either saints or villains. There's no room for nuance. No room for the soft middle ground where I stood, exhausted, for years. And yet I never spoke. Because I thought protecting him was the same as protecting myself. Because I believed that love was endurance. That love was sacrifice. That love meant carrying someone else's weight, even when it broke your back. It took me too long to understand. If someone loves the version of you that suffers quietly, they don't love you. They love the silence you provide. I walked to the hallway and opened the closet. Inside, tucked under the scarves, was a box of letters I had never sent. I wrote them during the worst of it, nights when he disappeared for hours, or days when he didn't speak at all. I wrote them to remind myself that I was still real. One letter said, "I don't want to be your lifeboat anymore. I'm drowning too." Another, "I miss who you were before you learned how to manipulate sympathy." And another, "Every time I defend you, I lose a piece of myself." I never mailed them. I didn't think they'd matter. But now I read each one. Slowly, out loud. My voice was quiet, steady, like reading a eulogy. There was one letter at the bottom, unopened, addressed to me, in my own handwriting. I had forgotten it existed. I opened it carefully, the paper dry and brittle. It said, "If you're reading this, it means you're still trying to prove that you're good, that you deserve to be chosen. Please remember, you don't have to audition for love. You never did." I sat down on the hallway floor, that letter clutched in both hands like a lifeline. And I wept. Not loudly, not for long, but enough to feel the floor beneath me. Enough to feel the years I had carried someone else's survival in my chest. Enough to feel my own name again. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I cried for myself, not for him. And somewhere deep in that silence, I realized something simple and profound. I was not the villain of this story. I was not the hero either. I was just someone who stayed too long in a house where love had become conditional. It wasn't that I was invisible. It was that I had made myself small so he could feel big. And no one ever thanked me for disappearing. I stood up slowly and put the letters back in the box. Not because I was ready to forget, but because I was finally ready to stop performing pain for anyone else's comfort. When I passed by the living room, I saw the table again. One chair out of place. One plate used. One folded napkin back in its drawer. It wasn't a crime to care. It wasn't weak to hope. But it was time to stop bleeding for people who bandaged themselves with your silence. I walked to the window and opened it just slightly. Cold air spilled in, sharp and honest. The kind that wakes you up. Across the street, the same amber-lit window was now dark. Everyone had gone to sleep. Or moved on. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't wish I was on the other side of the glass. I belonged in my own story. And I was done writing it in pencil, just so others could erase what made them uncomfortable. This wasn't revenge. This was remembrance. And it was only beginning. It didn't happen all at once. No dramatic gesture. No cathartic speech. I stopped checking his social media. It wasn't discipline. It was disinterest. At some point, the echo of his life stopped sounding like a threat. It became noise. Predictable captions, curated images, applause for versions of himself he crafted from my silence. Then, the final decision. I didn't go. The family gathering, the one I had helped organize every year for over a decade, this time, I didn't RSVP. I didn't explain. I didn't cancel anything. I just didn't show up. The invitations had already gone out. The dishes had been assigned. My name wasn't on the group chat anymore. I found out through someone else. Someone who assumed I already knew. I didn't tell them I'd seen the thread. I didn't ask why no one told me directly. I simply stayed home. It was snowing that day. Thick flakes, soft as memory. The kind that blanket the world in quiet and give everything the illusion of peace. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not the kind you force when you're trying not to cry. Not the kind that follows disappointment. This was different. It was the stillness of not chasing. Not proving. Not performing. I watched the snow pile on the windowsill, inch by inch. I didn't post a picture. I didn't light a candle. I didn't bake anything. I didn't write to anyone asking if they missed me. It felt like vanishing. But it wasn't. It was reappearing elsewhere. In the absence of my presence, their system began to misfire. I didn't know it yet, but small fractures were starting. Because that's what happens when you remove the silent labor. When the support beam slips out from under the ceiling, things tilt. I used to think silence was passive. That by stepping back, I was giving up. But now I understand silence can be active. Powerful. A deliberate withholding. Not of love, but of access. That afternoon, I opened the closet and began packing a box. Not of my things. Of theirs. Photos. Gifts. Tokens of loyalty I no longer felt required to prove. One by one, I slid them into the box, a keychain he gave me on our second trip. The hoodie I never liked but wore because he said it looked soft on me. A handwritten note from my sister that said, "Thank you for holding this family together." I held that note for a long time. Read it over and over. Because it was the kind of truth people only admit when they don't realize what it costs. Then I placed it in the box. That evening, I got a message. Short. Plain. From my mother. "Are you coming or not?" No greeting. No warmth. Just that. She hadn't spoken to me directly in weeks. But now, with the dinner approaching and people asking questions, I became relevant again. Not as a person. As a function. The one who brings dessert. The one who smooths tension. The one who absorbs the awkward silences. I stared at her message for a while. I wrote a response. Deleted it. Wrote another. Deleted that one too. Then I turned the phone off. Outside, the snow kept falling. A streetlight flickered across the white, casting everything in gold. I made tea, not chamomile this time. Something I liked. Something I chose. I sat on the couch with a blanket that smelled like nothing in particular. Just clean. Just mine. And I let the quiet come. This time, I didn't fight it. I remembered the first time he called me too much. We were driving back from his parents' house. I had asked if he'd told them about our move, about the raise I'd gotten. He said, "You always need to make everything about you." I had gone silent, ashamed, like the light inside me had been too bright. But that wasn't brightness. That was visibility. And that day, I had learned to shrink. The next day, I got a second message. This one from one of my cousins. "He told us you're struggling. That's why you didn't show up. We're praying for you." I laughed. Not cruelly. Not bitterly. Just softly. The way you laugh when you hear a rumor about yourself so far from the truth it feels like fiction. Struggling? No. I was healing. But healing looks like disappearing sometimes. At least to the people who only recognized your presence when it served them. That's the hard part. When you stop performing the role they cast you in, they assume you're lost. But you're not. You're just walking off stage. Finally, I didn't respond to the message, and I didn't feel guilty. I thought about all the times I rushed and texted back, explained myself, sent screenshots, apologized for the tone of my silence, tried to clarify what he'd twisted. Each time, it made things worse. Each time, it made me smaller. This time, I said nothing. And the silence was not empty. It was a room I had never entered before. Spacious. Clean. Mine. I thought about revenge. Not the sharp, theatrical kind. Not vindictive. Just accurate. Letting people see what really happened. Letting them sit with it. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. I wouldn't shame him. I wouldn't expose him in the way he feared. But I would no longer protect him. And that, I realized, was its own kind of reckoning. That night, I took a walk. The snow was thick now, but undisturbed. My boots left the only trail. Streetlights made halos in the flurry. The whole neighborhood felt paused. And in that hush, I made a promise to myself. I would stop being the apology for someone else's chaos. I would no longer be the interpreter of someone else's story. I would not be the silent witness to my own erasure. Let them wonder. Let them construct their stories in my absence. Let them feel, for once, the space I used to fill. I walked past houses with lit windows, silhouettes moving behind curtains, the glow of television screens and holiday lights. Warmth I no longer envied. Not because I didn't want it, but because I finally knew I deserved more than being tolerated. I deserved to exist without explanation, to be loved without proof, to choose myself not in rebellion, but in relief. By the time I got back, the snow had softened everything, even the jagged edges of memory. I brushed it off my coat, stepped inside, and closed the door gently. No drama, just peace. And in that quiet, I didn't feel like I was giving something up. I felt like I was returning. The first crack came through a voicemail. Not from him. He still hadn't reached out directly. It was my sister. Her voice wavered between confusion and concern, like she couldn't decide whether to worry about me or scold me for making her worry in the first place. "Hey, just wanted to check in. We noticed you didn't come. Everyone asked about you." Well, I mean, some people did. Anyway, I hope you're okay. I don't really know what's going on. Yeah, call me back. She sounded like someone trying to find a thread in the dark. Not because she missed me, but because something had shifted and she didn't know how to explain it to the others without me. I didn't return the call. I didn't need to. There was a time I would have responded immediately, not with words, but with proof. Texts, screenshots, context, apologies wrapped in explanations, clarifications wrapped in guilt. Not this time. Let them feel the uncertainty they once handed me like a gift. A few days later, I got a message from one of my mother's oldest friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "I heard some things. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I stared at it for a long time. It didn't say what things. It didn't need to. The ripple had begun. That's how it happens when the linchpin walks away. At first, it's confusion. Then, whispers. Then, panic. Because I was the one who answered the phone at midnight, who helped them plan birthdays, who called the doctor when they wouldn't, who remembered the quiet anniversaries, the hard ones, the grief-wrapped ones. I was the buffer, the one who smoothed the tension between them, who knew what not to say and when not to say it. And when I stopped, they realized the machine didn't run on kindness. It ran on sacrifice. Mine. The next email came from him. Short, measured, but not cold. Hey, hope you're doing okay. I know things got complicated. I just wanted you to know I never meant to hurt you. If you ever want to talk, I'd be open to that. No pressure. There was no apology. Not really. No admission. Just the subtle thread of manipulation dressed as concern. I knew what this was. I wasn't angry. I just saw it clearly. The only thing more unsettling than being abandoned is realizing the people who left you behind never expected you to stop waiting for them. I didn't respond, because talking to him wouldn't bring clarity. It would bring another cycle. Another story reshaped to center his pain. Another invitation to explain my absence like it was a crime. But my absence wasn't cruelty. It was a boundary. And boundaries always feel harsh to those who benefited from their absence. By the end of the week, I heard from my aunt. Then my cousin. Then a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to since the breakup. We didn't know everything. We thought you were just going through something. I wanted to ask them, why did you think that? Who told you that? And why didn't you ask me directly? But I didn't ask. Because their silence had already answered. In their version of the story, I disappeared without warning. In reality, I had been fading for years, right in front of them. I had been silent at dinners, careful with my words. I had looked tired, not from life, but from carrying the version of myself they preferred, easy, agreeable, invisible. And no one asked why. They just took the silence as proof that I was fine. Or worse, that I should be. So, when I finally withdrew completely, it felt sudden to them. But to me, it was overdue. I spent those days quietly. No need for declarations. No need for revenge. Just distance. Real distance. Not the kind where you sit in the same room and pretend not to ache. Not the kind where you smile through the sting of being misunderstood. No. This was a full, quiet stepping back. And it echoed. They tried to patch the gaps. I saw it in the photos, someone else cooking the dish I always made. Someone else organizing. Someone else stepping in. But something was missing in their eyes. That easy confidence they used to have when I was nearby. That sense that someone had it handled. That someone would step in if things got uncomfortable. Now, things stayed uncomfortable. And they didn't know how to fix it. I started to receive more messages. Short. Uncertain. From people who once took up space in my life like it was owed to them. I didn't realize you felt that way. I wish you had said something. You always seemed fine. Fine. What a strange word. It's the armor women wear when saying, I'm tired, gets called ungrateful. When saying, I'm hurt, gets labeled dramatic. When saying, I need something too, makes people flinch. I wasn't fine. But I was done explaining that. Let them sit with the silence now. Let them learn its shape. My sister texted again. This time longer. This time, her tone different. I've been thinking about what he said. About what you didn't say. I feel like I missed something. Or maybe ignored it. I don't know. Can we talk? It wasn't perfect. But it wasn't performative either. Still, I didn't reply. Not because I wanted her to suffer. But because I needed to see if her words were about guilt or change. The truth is, most people only reflect when silence becomes inconvenient. And I wasn't ready to become their mirror again. They needed to see themselves without using my patience to soften the image. Meanwhile, his posts shifted tone. The confident, cryptic captions became vaguer. Then inconsistent. Then gone altogether. Friends who once cheered for him stopped liking the updates. I didn't take pleasure in it. Not exactly. But I noticed it. The way people drift from those who no longer have someone to hold their narrative in place. Without me, his version of events started to fray. Without me, there was no one to validate his better self. That, I think, was the most unsettling part for him. Not that I was gone, but that I hadn't tried to come back. Because the cycle depended on my return, on my sense of guilt, on my need to make things make sense. But I no longer needed closure. I needed peace. And peace never asks you to explain yourself endlessly. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not from him. Not from family. From someone I barely remembered. An acquaintance from years ago. Someone I'd helped once, quietly. No fanfare. She wrote, "I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. You were kind when you didn't have to be. And I just wanted to say I saw it. Even if no one else did." I folded the letter and held it for a long time. A single sentence. A single gesture. And somehow, it restored something I didn't know was still broken. Not because I needed validation, but because I needed to know I hadn't imagined it, that I had existed fully even when others only saw my usefulness. That evening, I stood at the kitchen window again. The snow was melting now. Not gone, just softening. I watched a drop of water trail down the pane and thought about how slow things fall apart. And how quietly they can begin again. Not with noise. Not with revenge. With truth. And the space to breathe. It didn't end with a final word. Not a confrontation. Not a public reckoning. Just a breath. Then another. Until breathing felt like something I wasn't borrowing anymore. Sometimes, the most radical act of healing is to simply stay quiet when they expect you to speak. Especially when your voice was the one thing they counted on to hold their version of the truth together. I hadn't responded to any of their messages. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood. If I said anything, I would start to explain. And I was done making myself understandable to people who never wanted to know me, only the version of me that served them. The house was clean now. Really clean. Not just wiped down for guests. I'd gone through everything, every drawer, every closet, every forgotten pile. Not as a purge. Not as revenge. As a ritual. Every object held a memory. Every memory held a weight. And every weight was a decision. Do I carry this? Or do I let it stay here? That process, slow and steady, is what saved me. Not some big transformation. Not a grand moment. Just tiny choices, made in solitude, one after another, like laying bricks in a path back to myself. Then one morning, there it was. The letter. A small envelope, cream-colored, tucked into the mailbox between bills and flyers. No return address. Inside was a short note. Just 5 sentences. I saw you once. Years ago. At that hospital, the night he said no one came. But you were there, in the hallway, holding a cup of coffee, shaking. I didn't say anything then. But I remember your face. I remember your loyalty. I just wanted you to know you weren't invisible. There was no signature. Just space at the bottom. A silence so full of meaning it brought me to tears. Not loud tears. Not unraveling. Just soft ones, the kind that come from being witnessed, finally, without having to beg for it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the windowsill. The snow outside had turned to slush now, gray at the edges. Life moving forward. Imperfect. Real. The next message from my sister came later that week. Longer this time. Messier. Less rehearsed. I don't know how we got here. I've been reading through old messages, trying to piece things together. I think I believed him because I didn't want to believe what it would mean if he wasn't telling the truth. And maybe I didn't want to know how much we leaned on you until you were gone. You don't have to respond. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see you. I read it 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't answer. I just let the words be what they were, an opening. Not a door I needed to walk through, but a window cracked enough to let the air shift. Later that evening, I stood in the living room, watching the light turn golden. That hour where everything looks softer, even the things that once hurt you. I looked around the room. The lights. The quiet. the steadiness of my own company, and I realized, for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. Not him. Not them. Not even forgiveness. Because sometimes, the most honest closure is no closure at all. Just the decision to stop standing in a doorway that only opens from one side. There was no anger left. Not really. Just a kind of tired kindness. The kind you give to a past version of yourself. The girl who tried too hard. The woman who believed loyalty would protect her. The one who thought sacrifice would earn her a seat at the table. I made tea. My favorite kind this time. The one I had stopped buying for years because he once called it too strong. Strong, I've learned, is not the opposite of soft. They live together in the same body. Mine. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This one shorter. From him. I just hope you're okay. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it moved me, but because it didn't. This was the man I once loved so deeply that I forgot where he ended and I began. A man I carried, defended, explained. A man who turned my quiet loyalty into ammunition. And now all I felt was distance. Not hatred. Not vengeance. Just space. Space where his voice no longer echoed. I didn't block him. I didn't delete the message. I simply didn't reply. Sometimes the most profound answer is no answer at all. And that's when I knew. I was free. Not in the cinematic way. Not in the dramatic exit, the big scene. But in the quiet knowing. I didn't need anyone to believe my version of the story anymore. Because I did. I knew what I gave. I knew what I carried. I knew the cost. And I knew the truth. I lit a candle. Not the kind I used to light for guests. Not one with cinnamon or spice. Just a simple, clean scent. Something that smelled like new beginnings. Then I opened the window. Let the cold in. Let the air shift. Let the silence stretch. Not emptiness. Not loneliness. Just space. I sat down and wrote myself a letter. You are not what they forgot. You are what you remembered in time. You are not what they misnamed. You are what you reclaimed. You don't owe them your voice. You don't owe them your story. But if you ever choose to tell it, let it be for your freedom, not their understanding. I folded the letter and placed it beside the one from the stranger. Two kinds of witnessing. One from outside. One from within. I turned off the lights. The room glowed with the last light of evening. Everything in its place. Even me. Especially me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had disappeared. I felt present. Alone. But free. Not unfinished. But untethered. No longer a background character in someone else's redemption arc. No longer the stagehand behind their performance. Just a woman, warm in the silence she built for herself. And in that silence, I finally heard my own voice. Not trembling. Not apologizing. Just steady. And quietly certain.